Welcome back to Paris History Avec Hemingway, and today we are talking about Notre Dame. It's a very special date, and we want to just bring attention to the church. They've been doing so much work to it, getting it ready for the Olympics, and Claudine has a lot of information to share with us.
Yeah, so the fourth anniversary of the fire was just on Saturday. So it was 4 years ago at 6:18 p.m. that the fire started. So it's kind of crazy to think that we are now closer to it opening than we are to the fire, which is really great. And so I wanted to give everybody a few updates on what is going on and how it's proceeding and the date that it's supposed to open. But first, I'll give you a little bit of background on Notre Dame. The Notre Dame on the Ile de la Cité is, of course, where Paris was founded. And that was the beginning of Paris. That was just right there. And it was much smaller of a footprint than we see today when you go to the island, because they built up the sides around it because it literally just was, an island that just sloped into the water. So they built up around it at the very end of it, towards the Pont des Arts. And that is actually that little tiny part from Pont Neuf towards Pont des Arts was also a separate island. And so they kind of built those up and joined it. So even though the island today is not very big, it's still bigger than what was originally Paris when you think about it, how large Paris is today. But that right where Notre Dame is, they're going all the way back to the 6th century. There's been churches there. And when you could go, when we could go later and go into more of the parve in front of it, if you look down, you could actually see where they have markings in the stone of the streets and some of the chapels that had been there before, which is kind of cool to find and see.
Yeah.
But the original church that was back there goes back to the 6th century, and it was named Saint Etienne. And Saint Etienne is also Saint Stephen in English, but that is why the church at the top of the hill next to the Pantheon Saint Etienne du Mont, which is, we've talked about many times, we've talked about Saint Geneviève, and then of course that's the church from Midnight in Paris that everybody knows of. But that church was named Saint Etienne du Mont as an homage to the first church that was there in the Ile de la Cité.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And there's a little something that's saved from it that's on Notre Dame today, which I'll tell you about. But in 1161, Maurice de Sully, who was the bishop, decided he wanted to have this huge grand church that would be bigger than anything anybody has seen built in Paris. And he actually dug into his own pockets to pay for it. So the beginning of Notre Dame was paid for by one person. Of course, back then the church and, all the bishops, everything, they had an insane amount of money. I mean, Ile de la Cité was almost all church at one point until the palace was built. And then, you go over to Saint-Germain, and like literally where I sit right now was part of the Saint-Germain-des-Prés Abbey. Then you right past that was Saint-Sulpice. So a ton of the property of Paris was actually owned by the church.
That makes sense since everything was churches over there anyway.
Yeah, everything. So in 1163, even though the building started in 1161, but in 1163, in April, there's not an exact date. It happened around Easter, which that year I looked up, and March 24th was Easter in 1163,
Oh,
but it
wow.
was between March and April. But, of course I spent like 30 minutes trying to find the exact date, but but they laid the first stone in front of Pope Alexander III and Louis VII. And then that was 860 years ago.
Wow, that's
Right
insane.
now.
That's wild.
Yeah, so crazy. So when it was built, it's 416 feet long, 130 feet wide, and 109 feet high. So it was the largest church in the Western world. I don't know. I think that now there's, probably some churches bigger, but definitely not I'm sure that there's some in England that are bigger. But I should actually see which is the biggest church in the world.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know. Maybe the Sagrada Familia?
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, and that still never will be finished.
Yeah, they're still working on it.
Well, yeah, that's just such a crazy story. But in 1196, Bishop Sully died, but he left in his will and all of his money to have the lead roof finished. And the lead roof was 43,000 sheets of lead.
Whoa.
that was put up there. And all of that, of course, as we know, melted. In 1345, it was finished. The church was finished. So it's a very long time, 1161 to 1345. During the revolution, it was because, they were going through and getting rid of the churches and anything with the monarchy. And it was renamed the Temple of Reason, which I don't think there was a lot of reason going on, but it was a Temple of Reason, and they would also use it to store like ammunition and oats and everything else. In 1802, it was returned to the church on April 18th. So, practically when you're listening to this is the anniversary, and that was returned from Napoleon. So he was the one who said, we're giving this back. This is now back in the hands of the Catholics. In 1831, Victor Hugo wrote his book Notre-Dame de Paris, which is also, Hunchback of Notre Dame in English. That book, basically, he would walk by it all the time and see how it was just falling apart. And he thought, well, I'll write a book about it. And the book it had people going there to see it, and everybody was like, we have to save it. So Victor Hugo, basically, with his book, saved Notre Dame.
That I remember. Yeah, we talked about that in another episode, I think.
Yeah, when we talked about the Romantic writers,
Yes.
which is so cool. And then he later saved the Roman ruins over in the Latin Quarter, because everybody, they were, came across those when they were working on widening Rue Monge. And he was like, you can't bulldoze through this. You have to save it. So Victor Hugo was doing all sorts of stuff to save Paris.
Say authors did a lot more than just writing.
I know they did. In 1845, Viollet-le-Duc, one of my favorite people, he started the restoration. He and another architect named Lazu won the competition for their plan to redo the cathedral. They had just finished Saint-Chapelle. It went from 1845 to May 31st, 1864. Lazu actually died during it, not at it, but he passed away during the plan pretty early. So Viollet-le-Duc finished it, and there's all sorts of little markers, which I'll share on the cathedral from him. But the spire that we know today that is gone, that fell during the fire, that replaced a spire that was actually added in the 13th century that lasted until 1786, when it was damaged in a storm. So they ended up taking it down because they were worried it would fall and, somebody would get hurt or the cathedral would be hurt. So it was without a spire for about 80 years until Viollet-le-Duc put it back on.
Interesting. So they didn't even have it all that time.
No, and there was recently in the US a 60 Minutes episode the Sunday, I think it was Easter Sunday. And I, of course, streamed it and watched it from Paris. And it was interesting because they talked about the spire, but they just acted like that was the very first one. And of course, they have a limited amount of time that they're telling a story. But, there was a spire before. They were kind of saying that this was the first spire and all of this, but it's like there was a spire there for, 400 years. But it was Viollet-le-Duc that ended up putting it back. And then the one that's going to be built now is going to be built to the exact specifications.
Nice. I can't wait to see the finished product. It's been so long just looking at construction. It feels weird to think it will ever be done.
Yeah, well, and the spire, you're going to see it sooner rather than later. It's going to start going up quickly. But just a quick thing about the timeline of the fire. And that was April 15th, 2019. And it was 6:18 p.m. when the first alarm went off. They have a very, very fancy alarm system. And it was the gentleman that was sitting there in this room that somebody has to just sit there, with this alarm system. And it started going off, and it had only been like the first couple of days of his job. And it was this thing was so advanced, but it didn't, like, they were confused of where the fire was. So they sent somebody up to the sacristy, which is a little building off of Notre Dame that the treasury is in. And that's where they thought it was. So they went up there on the roof, and they're like, we don't see anything. And then another alarm went off at 6:30. And then that was when they started to see the smoke. So it, unfortunately it was, hopefully, thankfully it wasn't worse, but too bad they didn't see that sooner.
Yeah.
But also, where the roof is and how far it is, they don't have a sprinkler system in there. I don't know how big of a difference it would have made, because even if they saw it, say 6:20, it still took a bit for the firefighters to get there because of where the island is.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. I remember seeing the smoke from up in Walmart and we're like, what is that? What's all that smoke?
Oh, I can't even. Yeah, I was coming 4 days later. I was getting to Paris on Good Friday. This happened on Monday of Easter week. It
I've
was a
met
Monday.
people that still have breathing problems because they ran towards the fire and all that
Yeah.
lead. They,
Well, and there's still like even now there's signs around there that you shouldn't touch shouldn't touch your face, you shouldn't eat around there, always wash your hands when you leave because that lead, I mean, like I said, 43,000 sheets of lead
yeah,
that just melted and that just, there's still the construction guys that work on it they have to get to work each day. They have to put these brand new white suits on, covered head to toe. They, take it off to go to lunch and take a shower, throw away the suit, come back, do it all over again. And they
yeah,
have to do
that
that.
lead is super dangerous.
Yeah, it's not great. But at 7 o'clock, 150 to 200 firemen started to arrive, which up to 40 vehicles came as well. And I had my French fireman, and I was sending him messages from the U.S. going, "What's happening at Notre Dame?" He wasn't working that day, and he was like, "Oh, I think it's probably a drill." And I was like, "I don't think a drill would be on the bottom of the news." And we still laugh to this day because I was the one who told him Notre Dame was on fire from, Oregon.
Yeah.
But he was great because he was also giving me all this inside information because I was like, where are the firemen? And he's like, it's hard to get there because of the traffic. This is the downside of, it's lovely and wonderful to have these streets with no cars on it as a pedestrian. But when emergency vehicles need to get through, and you have all these roads that are basically now all that's where all the traffic is funneled, and what are they going to do when a fire truck's trying to get through and the cars can't move? It's
Yeah,
dead.
exactly.
So he was like they're trying to get there, so they're coming from other ways, and then he's like they're going to send it from the Seine. They could take the boats, and the boats are going to go, and so that was it was really great to have kind of this inside information telling me, because of course I was just freaking out watching it happen.
Of course.
um, but at 7:10, it was this captain. His name was Marc Poirot Blanc. He and this is, of course, I love this. The firefighters from the Louvre and also the Ministry of Culture. All of these people came to because of the treasures that are in Notre Dame, the paintings, the crown of thorns, the tunic of Saint Louis, all of that stuff. People like that was my second thought when this was happening was all of those things that were in the church. And the Louvre has its own fire department at the Louvre, and they are all trained in what they would have to do. If there's a fire, what they would have to do and how they would open cases and handle art. So they were all brought in right away to help with that and get everything out of the church. Some of the stuff was left until the next morning, but the most important things, including the crown of thorns, were taken out quickly that night. They even at one point had like a daisy chain of officials passing things, from one another all the way outside the church, and which is just, I mean, the amount of things that happened that night, and it could have been so much worse. We could have lost the entire cathedral, and it's amazing that it's as well as it is.
Yeah, it's good that everyone jumped into action and helped each other once they figured out what was happening.
Yeah, yeah. At 7:50 was the worst part. That's when the spire fell. It's 826 tons, French tons. And it fell. And when it fell, because it broke off and the spire went straight down into the church, that's what broke through the ceiling. And when it went through the church and hit the ground, it shoved the front doors of Notre Dame open, which those doors are immense and very, very heavy. And it just basically blew the doors right open.
Wow, I can't imagine seeing that in person.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, I sat there yesterday because I did a live video from there giving all of this and even more. It was like an hour and 20 minutes, and I'll put the link on my website. You can watch it on YouTube. And I sat there, I got there about a half hour early because they have these bleachers set up now in front of it. And I got there early to make sure I had a seat because that's where I was going to do the video from. And I just sat there looking at it, just thinking of, 4 years ago at that moment. And all of us, and watching it was difficult, but I can't even imagine if you were a firefighter or an official watching it, and what do you even do?
Yeah, it must have been. I know a lot of people were crying. It was devastating.
Yeah, it was pretty horrible. But at 9:30, that's when they decided we have 30 minutes. There's 30 crucial minutes that if we can't get this contained, we're going to lose the whole thing because the fire started coming from the roof and getting into the rafters of the towers. And that's where the bells are. The South Tower has the Emmanuel and Marie, which just on Easter Sunday, those bells rang out. And I was sitting there for it and made a 5-minute video of the whole entire thing, which was amazing because Marie hasn't rung out in 6 or 7 years.
Wow.
But the bells are massive. They are huge. And so the North Tower has more bells in it. They're smaller, but still incredibly heavy. And the belfry that they're hanging in is wood. So they were like, well, if the fire gets in there, it's obviously going to burn the wood, and the bells are going to fall to the ground, taking the entire facade of the cathedral with it.
Yikes.
So they had 30 minutes, and these firefighters that are incredibly brave they went up into the tower and were able to fight the fire and get it out. And by 3:30 a.m., the fire was completely contained.
That's insane. They did
Yeah.
a good job.
Yeah. And so now, 4 years later, they are including, you have to add in the fact that we had COVID. They are actually on schedule, if not a little ahead of schedule. It's not going to be open by the Olympics. It's going to be, the date is December 8th, 2024 is the date that they say they could have it ready. And so that I will be there. I already have it on my calendar. It's already marked off. I will be there that morning.
Yeah, it's super exciting.
It's really exciting. So the spire that I mentioned, is, the original one was from the 1317 to 1786. It was in 1857 that Viollet-le-Duc added it. It's 315 feet from the ground. It's based on the drawing by Adolphe Victor Duchamp, and they added the rooster up there in June of 1859. The rooster at the top of it is my very favorite, and I used to love to share this story about it on Instagram before the fire, and nobody seemed to ever care. But it was like, hello, this is super cool. But then as it was saved, and we're recording this on Sunday, April 16th, 4 years ago today, they found it a little bit, beat up, but they found it. And the love of my life, Philippe Villeneuve, the architect, I'm in love with him. He's not aware of it, but he's the one who found it, picked it up. And I just shared a picture on my Instagram of that picture of him holding the rooster. And I remember I was just in tears. I was so happy. But it was in 1935, they took down the rooster to regild it because it was gold. It's bronze and it was covered with gold gilding. A Cardinal Verdier placed in there 3 relics. The one relic was a piece of the crown of thorns. The other relic was of Saint Denis, who's the patron saint of Paris, the one that, had his head lopped off, and he picked it up and walked 3 kilometers with it. And then, of course, my lady, Saint Geneviève, a relic of hers. And if you remember from the 2 episodes we did about her, I think in January 2022, maybe 21, she is the one who saved Paris when she was alive from Attila the Hun, but then she also saved it, hundreds of times after she died because of her relics were used in these different ceremonies. And so she continued to save Paris. And so I think because Saint Geneviève was in that rooster, that's why we still have Notre Dame.
I believe that for
I'm
sure.
sticking with it. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a fact. But that's when they redid it. So today you could see the rooster and you could see all these statues that were on there. And I'll tell you about that at the end. But just yesterday, they have the base of the spire is now in place. The transept of which is where the big gaping hole is, that is now filled in. So instead of it being this giant hole to the sky, that's filled in. They just dropped in, and now it's in place as of April 15th, 2023, 4 years to the day. The stool, they call it, of the spire is in place because they have to put that in first before they could start building the roof. So they actually have to do the spire first, and then they'll start adding the roof.
Wow.
They started to build it in July of 2022. It takes 1,000 trees to build the spire. It is going to be built to the exact replica and plans that Viollet-le-Duc had, which he was an amazing architect. So he had plans of every single part of what he did. You could see some of these plans yourself. And so they're doing it down to the exact specific detail and in the exact specific method. Everything on Notre Dame has to be done in the same way they did it back then.
That's insane. Oh,
Yeah.
and 1,000 trees. Wow.
1,000 trees just for that. It's another more than 1,000 trees for the roof, which is a whole thing. I probably spent 7 hours the other day just on looking up information and reading. I have these really great magazines that Notre Dame puts out once a year. It's all about the restoration work and has these great stories. And the newest issue that just came out for this year is a lot of it is about the trees and the forest. So they used to call the roof the forest, and so you heard that a lot during the fire. It was called that because it was 1,300 trees, which is the equivalent of 52 acres. And all of the trees came from property that were owned by the church, bishops, or canons of France.
Whoa.
So it was all, then they're like holy trees.
Holy trees.
But were noble oaks. So a lot of these trees that they're getting now are like 280 years old, 290 years old. And then right after the fire, they had 273 donations of people donating timber, half of it from public forests and the other half from private. And what I didn't realize is that a third of France is covered in forest.
But that's kind of sad. They cut down 300-year-old trees.
Yeah, but I mean, we're talking about the trees that they're harvesting is 0.2% of the forests of France.
So, okay.
Not very much.
300-year-old trees.
Yeah, but it's also in a forest of like thousands of 300-year-old trees. But still, it is sad. But I read some really amazing articles about some of the people. There's a gentleman named Daniel Pichon. He is the second generation of the Pichon family that has been lumberjacks, and they owned a sawmill. He chopped down on March 5th, 2020, the very first tree. It was 4 feet wide and 88 feet high. Wow. The equivalent of €1 million of trees are being harvested that are all donated. Wow. They also have to cut all these trees down each year by March 15th, because after March 15th, with the spring, I guess the sap starts flowing and all sorts of things start happening. So they have to cut these trees down before then. But they started, as I said, the first tree was March 5th, 2020. That's not even a year after the fire. So they started doing this because these trees will shrink a few inches once they finally dry. So they have to have these things done early, and they start shaping them and just put them in, warehouses all over France until they go to the different carpenters that start to build the things that they need for the cathedral.
Wow, this is so much work. So much is going into this. It's quite amazing to watch.
It is. I mean, which is really cool because, you describe our podcast all the time that I talk about dead people and you talk to living people. And what's really cool about this is we're literally watching history.
Yeah.
So, the way I talk about Viollet-le-Duc could be generations later could talk about Philippe Villeneuve that way.
Yeah.
That he was the one, when we, it's just like, oh, and, he did this and he did that. No, well, Philippe is going to be the one that's going to do that. So it's really cool. Another one that I thought was really neat is the Harcourt family, Philippe d'Harcourt. They have a private forest that has been in their family since the 12th century. And they gave 5 trees that are going to be used in Notre Dame, which, that's just so cool. I mean, that's a pretty big bragging rights that, those are our, I don't know. They should put little plaques on them, like, donated by.
Love that.
But, I mean, that's pretty cool where you could say, our family donated these trees that are going to be used to rebuild Notre Dame. I mean, I can't think of anything cooler than that.
Yeah, that's really a great way to contribute.
But it's also like the amount of people, there's this general that came out of retirement to oversee the whole project. Philippe Villeneuve, he is 60 years old. I can't believe I missed the birthday of the love of my life was back at the beginning of March. But Philippe Villeneuve has been the architect. He's a chief architect of the monuments of France, and he was named the architect for Notre Dame 10 years ago. So in 2013. And so he was actually working on it to restore the spire. And that's why the scaffolding was around the spire. And out of some sort of, divine intervention, the 16 statues were removed a week before on the 11th of April. They were lifted off of the roof. Otherwise, we would have completely lost those.
Yeah.
And so they were getting ready to do work to restore the spire when all of this happened. So, in some ways, he was already in the midst of working on something. So they were probably a few steps ahead of this as far as what to do instead of like starting from scratch. And so it is, I mean, it's pretty fascinating. If you go to there today, you could sit up in these new bleachers that they put in a few months ago, and you could look, there's a big white tent in front of the cathedral. And in that there's stone cutters and masoners that are like basically shaping the pieces that will go back onto the cathedral that were destroyed in the fire. And inside of it, they are, Philippe was saying that this is an opportunity that when the doors open again to the public, the entire cathedral is going to be like sparkling and new. And
Yeah.
if it wasn't for the fire, for them to do that, it would have taken 2 or 3 decades
Yeah.
to do that. So inside of it right now it's literally filled with scaffolding, and they're going to build more scaffolding to go all the way up around the spire. So it's going to get even higher, but the spire should be in place by the end of this year.
That's huge. I mean, after all this time, and we got to watch it go up. That's so cool.
Yeah. So I'm going to go every week. I was like, I'm going to walk over there every week. It's only about 15-minute walk from my apartment. I'm going to go every single week and take photos of it and post those on my Instagram. And then so we could kind of watch it as it goes up. But, inside they had the chapels. There's 24 chapels in the church, and each one of them, the walls are painted and decorated, and you've got, you have frame paintings in there that they're very historic, and you have monuments. They have been working to freshen up all of the paintings on the walls, which were all designed by Viollet-le-Duc. All of the stained glass in the cathedral, none of it was harmed. They had taken the 39 windows out of the very top of the choir that's closest to the roof. They took all of those out and sent them to like 5 different workshops across France. None of those were hurt. And partially it was because they were so dirty and dusty and soot that it was like a half an inch of protection, that when the lead dust settled on it, the dirt saved it.
So it's good that it was so dirty.
I know. So don't clean your house, because you never know.
Good advice.
But they, those have all been going back in. It's really hard now to see because there's so much scaffolding around the church. So you really can't see, if you looked at it even just a year ago, you could see where those windows were gone. But now, it's really difficult to see that. And so they're working on all of this stuff. They did this thing, which I saw a video for, where they basically sprayed this latex onto the walls and the columns and everything and left it on there for a few weeks, and then they literally pulled it off. So it's like pulling off like plastic, and it pulled out all of the impurities and all of the dirt and everything. And they say that the inside of it now is like this beautiful creamy color, when it was kind of getting to be like dark gray.
Wow, that's so crazy what they could do. And now it's going to be shiny and new, like you said.
It's going to be absolutely amazing. And I have a couple different things. I get emails from the restoration of Notre Dame. So I see things like every single day. And I try to share a lot of them on my Facebook page, because that's usually where I see some of it. But it's pretty fascinating, and how open they are to share it. Because of course people, they also still are, asking for donations. And they did a thing that was really cool, that you could go on there and actually like kind of almost adopt something. So it'll be like, here's this painting of, Saint Peter that was done by, Eustache Lesueur, and it's like you could donate for the restoration of that specific painting.
Yeah, adopt a painting.
Adopt a painting. I'm all for that one. But I mean, what they're doing is absolutely just amazing. And all of the work and all of the people that are going into it. One of the other really cool things that they've discovered in this process, Viollet-le-Duc was a self-taught architect. Like he just basically for a few years just went around France sketching and all of these historic monuments and churches and everything. And he basically went to the École des Beaux-Arts for a very short period of time and didn't want to do that. So he just basically self-taught himself how to become an architect. And he used methods that people hadn't seen. One thing they discovered was when the fire happened and the roof burnt down, if you go around the whole top of the church, all of those stones were locked together with huge iron staples in all different sizes. So some of them are like 6 inches long, some of them are like 18 inches long, literally just like almost like, like a Lego, where these iron bands would go, lock these two stones together. And it was something they had never seen. They could find iron bands like that used in Rome in like the Colosseum, but not in that same way.
That is so wild that he taught himself and then just created all these new methods.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating. But they say because of that, it probably held the church together.
His giant staples.
Because the thing about Gothic architecture is, the flying buttresses, everything goes in to keeping that cathedral up, including the rose windows. So the huge rose windows, the rose window in the front of the church dated back to the 12th century. And then he completely took all the glass out and they shifted it. They literally like shifted it like 10%. And because even though it's glass, that also is used in the support of the church.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So even like the columns that were in the very center of the church inside, when the beams were burning and falling down, they were getting hit. And so that was also like they had to shore those up quickly, because if one of those goes, there goes the church. If a flying buttress fails, there goes the church. Like there was so many variables in it that if one little thing, one of 20 things happened, the church was gone.
That's so crazy. It was just like, it was almost, you had to be a little faithful for all this to come together.
Yeah. Saint Genevieve, I'm telling you. But there was one of the oldest things in Notre Dame was a statue of the Virgin Mary that is now in Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois. But it came from, if you remember years ago when we did the live video around Ile de la Cité, and there was a little tiny church that, you can't go in, and the only thing left inside of it is this tiny chapel. Well, that's where they found this statue, and it dates back to, I think it's an 8th century. And so she stood underneath the transept just to the right of the altar. And everything above her now was just basically a hole. And below her were just burning embers of logs. She didn't even have a scratch on her.
What are the chances?
Yeah. You could, believe what you want to believe. It's, sometimes it's just maybe fate, luck, or what have you, but it's also could be Saint Genevieve. But it is, they found in February 2002, they found 2 sarcophagus when they were underneath the transept doing work. And they found different statues. They found all sorts of things. So it's amazing the things that they've uncovered. The treasury will come back, but just the president was just there on Friday to visit on the right before the 4-year anniversary. And he even wants a museum created that would tell this story of Notre Dame, which, we could do 7 hours of this and I'd still have more to tell you. So it would be pretty amazing, because the thing is that, Notre Dame is the most visited monument in France, more than the Louvre, more than the Eiffel Tower. Also, it is also free, but they were getting like 53 million people a year going through the door. Whoa. And it does straddle a line between museum and a place of faith, because it is still a church. There's mass every day. There's everything, there's you could get married, you could have your baptism in there. it is, but it also had, when they talked about how they were going to restore it, they were talking about changing and, making it having these, the pews on wheels so they could be moved away. And it's, I'm not Catholic. I wasn't raised Catholic, but I still think it needs to stay a church.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, the aspect of adding a museum somewhere would be interesting, maybe
Yeah.
connected, but the main part should be free.
Yeah, and it should be free, and I mean, I think it'd be okay, like charge everybody €1 to go in there, and then that money is used to help with the, upkeep of the cathedral. But it is also, it's a public space because it's a church. And so, if you want to go into the treasury, you do have to pay a ticket for that. But to go into the church, it was always free. But it is going to be, it's going to be walking a fine line, I think, when it reopens, because of course everybody's going to want to see it, um, and be back. They'll just be so happy to be back. It's not going to be open by the Olympics, which they had hoped for, but you never know. I did have a chance to talk to my great love, Philippe Villeneuve, last September at Notre-Dame at the special Patron weekend. And I had to really get up the nerve to even say hi to him, and it was all in French, so what I understood. But he said it was still on track to open in April. It says originally it was supposed to open 1 year from April 16th was the original plan, that people would be back in there having mass the day after the anniversary.
I mean, maybe he was actually proposing marriage to you. You just didn't
Oh,
understand.
that's true. Maybe our wedding is supposed to be next year. So everybody's
Exactly.
invited. It's going to be in Notre Dame. It's very exclusive.
Everyone show up, bring a gift.
I literally, like, in my old job, I had met a lot of celebrities. I worked with a lot of celebrities. I don't really get starstruck, but if it was Neil Diamond or Philippe Villeneuve, I literally was just like, oh my God, there he is. Just because what he's doing is just amazing to me, and I just love it. But because we can't go inside of Notre Dame right now, you can go outside. They have this really cool thing set up so you can sit there and look at it, which gets you higher so you can kind of look down, and see kind of the doors. Yesterday afternoon, I could see people inside working. They're working all the time there. But there's a few really cool things you could do. So now at Notre Dame, there's always been the Crypt Museum. And so that was discovered in the 70s when they were going to go in and build a parking lot. And they started to go down there and found all of these, medieval remains, bases of the former churches that were there. And so they had to stop. You can't put a parking lot there now. So now it's a museum. And so they have an exhibit going on now, that I think goes on for about 2 years that's about Victor Hugo and Viollet-le-Duc and their effort with the cathedral. And it's really cool. There's drawings and everything, and it's really neat. And right next to that now is a new thing that is in the former parking lot. So it's in between the church and towards the prefecture. You could go down there. This is free. It's called Notre Dame, the Heart of the Restoration. It's open Tuesday through Sundays from 10 to 8, free. There's also where you could do the augmented reality goggle thing. You could do that. That's not free. But this thing is really cool because it's all about the people restoring it, the effort to do it. It has a little thing about everything. It has a video in there about the trees and how they're harvesting them, the carpenters, the stone cutters. There's even pieces of the charred wood that was once in the attic, which is really hard to see. Pieces of the stone that fell from, the top. That is really cool. My other favorite thing is the architecture museum that's in your second home, the Trocadero. That's called From the Builders to the Restorers. And this is a whole history of Notre Dame. It just keeps evolving because this is where over a year ago they placed the 16 statues that were once on the roof, and those were completely restored. They're there now, so you can actually go up and see them. We did an episode, I think in January 2022, all about those. And so we'll put the link too, because you could even take the episode with you and walk through, and I'll tell you about each one of the saints. That's also where the rooster is, which is awesome to see. It's a really cool museum. Nobody really ever goes there. It's just right there on the what it would be the north side of the Trocadero, the north side of Notre Dame.
Yeah, when you're facing the Eiffel Tower, it's the museum on the left.
Yeah, really, really cool. It's like €9 to go there. They even have, and I just about died when I saw this, they had one of the LeMay's paintings that were given to the church. One of those is at the very end. They've got pieces of stained glass there. Some of it is a little duplicate or as far as what you see below Notre Dame in the heart of the restoration, but still go see both of them because it's really amazing. In Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois is where you'll find the Notre Dame that dates back to, long before the church was built. It's also where the Crown of Thorns is. And so every first Friday of the month after Easter, it comes out, I think about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Check their website. But you can see the Crown of Thorns. They also have the big candle holders that they once had, and it says Notre Dame du Paris. So I always have to light a candle there. But my favorite thing is going to be later this year because it joins two of my other favorite things, Notre Dame and the Louvre. The Louvre is having an exhibition starting October 19th. It's going to go through the 29th of January, 2024. That's going to be all about the treasury. So a lot of those treasures that were in Notre Dame will be in the Louvre because that's where a lot of them went for safekeeping and to be restored. They're doing a whole exhibit that's also going to be a little bit about the history of Notre Dame, and it's going to be inside the Louvre.
Whoa, that's really cool. What a great idea. It's like full circle.
Full circle. And I remember when they announced that, I think it was in 2022. And I was like, oh my God, that's so far. I can't wait till 2024, but now we're here. Well, 2023, I should say. Now we're here.
Well, I mean, we have so much to it's kind of like planning a trip, it's like planning is half the fun until we finally can visit. And there's all these wonderful things that you can do in the meantime until the church is reopened. And make sure you head over to ClaudineHemingway.com to learn more, check out her links, and join her every week for her lives, and just reach out.